I want you to meet Annabel Chong. To set a world record, this woman had sex with 251 men in 10 hours.
In 1995, a 22-year-old student from Singapore did something that most people thought would destroy her life forever. She had sex with over 250 men in 10 hours on camera.
I believe that part of what I'm trying to do is to project, the power of female sexuality, that we're not waltzing violets, we're not victims, for Christ's sake. I want to, in a way, infuse, the vitality of human sexuality. It's just as aggressive as male sexuality,
The media called her a monster. Her country called her a shame.
It's become a national ideology that just, a value judgment. To do pornography is to be against the collective agreement of what it means to be a Singaporean.
And the world called her Annabel Chong. But while everyone was watching the spectacle, they missed the most important part of the story. Grace Quek was conducting a social experiment that she eventually had to kill to survive. By the end of this video, you'll understand why a genius-level student chose the most extreme path possible and how she managed to vanish into a completely different life that no one saw coming. Most people think this is a story about a porn star who got famous for a record. But the reality is much darker. This is a story about what happens when a brilliant mind tries to use trauma as a weapon and realizes too late that the weapon has no handle. To understand Grace Quek, you have to understand the gifted trap. Imagine being raised in the hyper-competitive, conservative environment of Singapore. Grace wasn't just a student. She was the elite. High IQ, enrolled in the gifted education program, and destined for a career in law.
What she really like, I think she's, like I said, squeaky academic, really seriously driven woman.
This is the foundation of her entire life, a life built on logic, discipline, and the pursuit of excellence. But that straight-line path was shattered on a cold night in London. While studying law at King's College, Grace met a man on a train. What followed wasn't a romance. It was a brutal gang rape in a rubbish closet under an inner-city housing block.
He took me to this block council flats. There was this little trash disposal place, and went in there and did it. And the guy goes, "Wait a minute, I'll be back." Came back with his friend. I realized that they were there to fuck this girl and take her money, right? I just froze in a way. I was just doing it mechanically, just thinking, they might kill me, but they just kept coming in, right, one by one.
Now, here is where most people's understanding of trauma fails. We expect victims to hide. We expect them to shrink. But for a woman with Grace's intellectual intensity, the reaction was the opposite. She didn't just want to heal, she wanted to deconstruct the very concept of being a victim. She dropped out of law school and moved to the University of Southern California to study gender studies and photography. It was here that the persona of Annabel Chong was born. She didn't enter the adult industry because she was lost. Since her parents did not approve of her dropping out of law school, she needed a source of income to pay her college fees. In 1994, she started in porn by answering an advertisement for a modeling agency in LA Weekly. To Grace, her body was a laboratory. She saw pornography as performance art, a way to blur the boundaries between the academic and the visceral. She wanted to test a theory. Could a woman reclaim the aggressive role of the stud? Could she take the very act that was used to traumatize her, a gangbang, and turn it into a world record of her own design? This brings us to the moment that changed everything. the world's biggest gangbang. In January 1995, Grace stepped onto a set to have sex with 251 men. But if you think this was a glamorous or empowering day for her, you've been misled by the marketing. Behind the scenes, the reality was a mess of broken promises. She was promised $10,000 for the performance, a fee she intended to use for her college tuition, but she was never paid a single cent. The producers promised strict HIV testing for the participants, but she later discovered the verification was a lie. She was a scholar trying to play a game with sharks. Despite the lack of pay, the film became one of the highest-grossing adult videos of all time. But as the film climbed the charts, Grace's control over her own narrative began to slip. This is the double standard she wanted to challenge, but instead, it swallowed her whole.
Welcome to the show.
She appeared on The Jerry Springer Show and The Girly Show, hoping to discuss the gender politics of Messalina and female sexual agency. Instead, the hosts and the audience treated her like a freak show. They weren't interested in her USC degree or her theories on the wilting violet trope. They just wanted to count the men. The gap between the academic Grace and the porn star Annabel was becoming a canyon. In 1999, a documentary called Sex, the Annabel Chong story, hit the Sundance Film Festival. On the surface, it looked like a victory. It was nominated for a grand jury prize. It made her an international icon. But for Grace, it was a second betrayal. She later accused the director of misconstruing events and portraying her in a misleading way. There is a haunting scene in that documentary where Grace takes a knife to her own arm. While the world saw a woman in total control of her sexuality, the reality was a woman drowning in the pressure of her own creation. She realized that by trying to weaponize her sexuality, she had simply created a new way for people to consume her. She had tried to be the stud, but the world still treated her like the object. This is where the story takes a turn that sounds like a Hollywood script, but it is the most honest part of her life. In 2003, Grace did something even more radical than the film that made her famous. She issued a final message on her website: Annabel is dead and is now replaced full-time by her evil doppelganger. She didn't spend years planning this escape. By the year 2000, she was simply a woman who had run out of road. She was drowning in a persona she no longer wanted, exhausted by the media circus and the physical toll of her career. She needed a way out, but she had no idea where to go until she found the exit door by complete accident. The epiphany happened during a shift in a strip club. Grace was performing a role-play bit where she pretended to be a student learning to write computer code. The client was supposed to spank her whenever she made a mistake. But as she went through the motions, something strange happened. The logic of the code, the actual structure of the programming, began to make sense to her. It wasn't just a performance anymore. She realized she actually loved the work. In a world where her body had been debated, filmed, and judged, the binary world of software offered a sanctuary she hadn't known she was looking for. Code doesn't have a gender, and a compiler doesn't care about your past. She saw her chance and took it. She realized that if she could master this language, she could finally delete the version of herself that the world wouldn't stop consuming. She acted immediately. In 2001, she attained an associate degree in software engineering from Westwood College. For the next 2 years, she lived a double life, transitioning between worlds. By day, she worked as a freelance tech consultant under her legal name, Grace Quek. By night, she was still performing as Annabel to bridge the financial gap. But by 2003, she reached a breaking point. She hit the delete key for good, retired the name Annabel Chong, and disappeared into the corporate world. How does a woman whose face is synonymous with a world record sit in a job interview or at a dinner table with new friends without being caught? She realized she didn't need a disguise, she just needed to be exceptionally ordinary. She hid in plain sight by becoming a ghost in the machine. In the tech industry, your value is based on the quality of your code, not your history. She became so dependable, so quiet, and so focused on her work that even if a friend or coworker stumbled across an old headline, they couldn't reconcile the clinical, intellectual engineer in front of them with the hyper-sexualized character from the 90s. She had successfully hacked her own life, replacing the Annabel software with a career that led to a new life in California. For over 20 years, she wasn't an icon, she was just Grace. But there was one loop left open: the mother. The most heartbreaking part of the 1999 documentary was the confrontation between Grace and her mother in Singapore.
好，我一定为你争口气，我答应你，妈。
Her mother, a teacher, represented the traditional path Grace had abandoned. The shame was a weight Grace carried for decades. In January 2025, Grace made a final announcement on social media. She was leaving her American life behind. She was leaving the tech industry. She was moving back to Singapore to become a full-time caregiver for her elderly mother. The woman who once tried to break every social rule in existence, the woman who tried to burn down the concept of the dutiful daughter, has returned to the most traditional role possible. We often think that our past defines us like a permanent tattoo. We think that if we make a mistake or a radical choice on the scale that Grace did, there is no coming back. But Grace Quek proved that identity is not a prison. Annabel Chong was a persona, a shield, and eventually a burden. By returning to Singapore to care for the woman who birthed her, Grace isn't surrendering, she is completing her journey. She taught us that you don't have to be who the world says you are, even if the world has the footage to prove it. You can be the gifted student, the radical performer, the software engineer, and the devoted daughter all in one lifetime. The world's biggest gangbang was just 10 hours of a life that has lasted over 50 years. Annabel Chong is a ghost, but Grace Quek is finally home. Now that you understand how Grace killed her past to save her future, you might be wondering, what happens to the rest of us when our digital footprints become permanent? But that is a question for another time. For now, Grace is exactly where she wants to be in the peace of obscurity. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. See you in the next one.